What would you say if I told you that it's possible to rewire your brain? That you could modify your frequencies in a way that would allow you to unlock your potential, boost creativity, enhance performance, and expand spiritual awareness. Our first guest on the Chris Senise Podcast has devoted his life to exploring how all of this can be achieved through brainwave training. His programs lead to healing and transformation of unwanted personality traits, reducing stress and anxiety, resolving trauma, and even reversing key markers of brain aging. Participants report remarkable results, such as increases in creativity, IQ gains, and EQ boosts. With a rare blend of scientific rigor and visionary insight, he is known as the true pioneer in the field of neurofeedback. In the first ever episode of the Chris Senise Podcast, we're going to dig deep into frequencies, neurofeedback, and how brainwaves rule. Join me in welcoming Dr. James V. Hardt. Dr. James Hardt, you have a lot to share. I am really looking forward to this episode. Brainwaves. We have titled this episode Rewire Your Brain. Mm-hmm. Would that be accurate? Would
sure.
that be an accurate way of referring to this episode?
People do that all the time whenever they're learning.
Mm-hmm.
And so it depends on what you're learning. And some things that you learn are just facts. Other things that you learn are systemic changes in how you show up in the world and how you experience the world. And that's what we specialize in at Biocybernaut.
All right. So tell us about brainwaves, why they're important, and why this is your life's work.
Okay. A bunch of really, really good deep questions there. The simplest way to start is, and you've maybe heard teenagers say, pick their favorite sports team, or Mutant Ninja Turtles rule. They rule. Well, what we say is brainwaves rule. Okay. Brainwaves rule your life. Mm-hmm. Any thought or feeling, idea, imagination, memory, it all requires brainwaves. Okay. And when you change your brainwaves, you change your experience. Mm-hmm. And when you change your brainwaves enough, you actually change your identity. And of course, that's necessary for transformation. Transformation is when you change your identity. Now, there's a wonderful author, Frederick Dodson. See if I have a copy. Yes. Frederick Dodson, Parallel Universes of Self.
Okay.
And he says that identity and reality are synonymous. What that means is when you change your identity, you will change your reality. You will jump to a different timeline. And so people say, well, yeah, that's all well and good, but how do you change your identity? I say, simple. Change your brainwaves. Well, how do you do that? Simple. Come to Biocybernaut. You change your brainwaves, you change your personality, you change your reality, and life's good. Living your best life. This is something you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, living your best life, because I do believe that probably the most powerful yet underused tool is the mind. And I do believe that the mind is, with the right, I don't know if control would be the correct term to use, but
self-regulation.
Right.
Well, some people freak out about control. And now, even if you say self-control, they're still, So by saying self-regulation, it says the same thing without that loaded word control.
Okay. So if we self-regulate the mind.
And the way to do that is to self-regulate your brainwaves.
Right.
Because anything that you have in your mind is there only because of a certain underlying pattern of brainwaves. If you, in your mind, have sadness, you have the brainwaves for sadness. If you have in your mind the brainwaves for happiness, you have the feeling of happiness requires. Same with enlightenment. I mean, there's enlightenment in India, in yoga, is called samadhi. In Japan, it's called satori. And both of these superconscious states, samadhi in India and satori in Japan, are characterized by super high alpha all over the head. Now, there are differences in how that alpha responds to external world stimulation. But the fact is, both superconscious states require high alpha.
We hear a lot about meditation. It's not always easy in the beginning.
And that's because there's no feedback.
Right. You've talked about that. Tell us a little bit about how would that information help someone who is trying their best to meditate and not necessarily getting there, right? How can we help those people be less judgment, less self-judgment, right? That you're not necessarily going to know if you're doing it right or wrong, and there's a reason for that.
Well, you're asking a whole series of cascaded questions. Let me sort of peel them apart.
Okay.
The simple answer is feedback. Every parent and every teacher knows that if you don't give a child feedback, it's not going to learn. Mm-hmm. And so feedback has to meet three criteria: accurate, immediate, and reasonably aesthetic. Mm-hmm. And so if the kid gets into the cookie jar and you don't discover that till 2 weeks later, the feedback isn't going to be that useful. Mm-hmm. So feedback has to be accurate, has to be immediate, and reasonably aesthetic. And in meditation, there is no feedback at the beginning, and the beginning may last decades, because without feedback, you don't know what you're not doing right, and you don't know what you're doing wrong. Mm-hmm. And so the difference when you have feedback is that you can learn right from the very first moment with brainwave feedback. Now, the goal of self-regulating your brainwaves, having more alpha waves, there are things in life that are associated with more alpha, like happiness, relaxation, orgasm, meditation, if done right. And when you are doing something in your brain that even for a fraction of a second makes more alpha, you're not going to know that if you're meditating. But if you're in a Biocybernaut feedback chamber, then let's say you have alpha increase right here. The tone that's associated with that site will get louder, but only as long as the alpha is bigger. So the feedback is immediate. If there's more alpha, the tone gets louder. If there's less alpha, the tone gets quieter. And so it's important. You mentioned harmony as one of the things you want to strive for. Mm-hmm. And to achieve alpha activity at any place, let's back up. Everybody has heard of pacemaker cells for the heart. Mm-hmm. It turns out that there are also pacemaker cells for your alpha. They're located in a structure in the subcortex called the thalamus. And there's two halves. They're shaped kind of like an oblate spheroid, like a rounded football. One on this side, one on this side. Very deep in the brain. And each half of the thalamus has between 60,000 and 80,000 little pacemaker cells. And they run 24/7, always urging your brain, be an alpha, be an alpha, be an alpha. But what Shakespeare might call the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, distraction, doubt, drowsiness, all of that, gets in the way and prevents that little subtle urging from within reaching the surface. Now, in order to have because these cells produce very tiny signals, so you need to get a bunch of them in harmony in a little local region in order for the waves to add up. Because if the waves are out of phase, they cancel. You get zero voltage. But when you take a bunch of them and you add them up, then you get a bigger voltage. It doesn't ever get more than, a few microvolts, a few millionths of a volt, but that's enough to be picked up with our advanced technology. Mm-hmm. And so getting your head together in a local region of the thalamus will make enough of the signals that you can detect it at the surface. Mm-hmm. Well, what about the other side of the brain? Maybe it's not making alpha. And so what you want to do, you want to achieve harmony locally, so you can have big alpha at individual locations. And then you want to achieve harmony globally so that other parts of your brain can be in alpha at the same time. So you can jam together. You know how much fun that is when you and other musicians get going? I almost said magicians, but that's part of the game too.
Sometimes it's magical. Sometimes it's...
Yeah. And one of the things that makes it magical is harmony. And mathematically, we call that coherence.
Mm-hmm.
When you get two different regions of the brain harmonizing, they're on the same phase, they're at the same frequency, and life gets even better because there's more of you that shows up in a higher state.
Excellent. Can we walk through the different frequencies just to give our audience an idea of what the different frequencies are? And assuming alpha is, exactly where we want to end up.
Let's say you take a prism and you pass sunlight through the prism,
Mm-hmm.
and you break it down into a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
The slowest frequency will be the red light. And then there's orange, and as you go up, then you get yellow, you get green, you get teal, you get blue, you get ultraviolet. Well, in this process, what you have is we take the prism, we pass the sunlight through, we break down, we get the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Here, we take not a shaft of sunlight, but you take a channel of brainwaves, and you pass it through the electronic equivalent of a prism, and you break it down. Delta is the slowest, 0 to 4 cycles a second. Theta is next, it's 4 to 7. Then there's a gap that we call Schumann, which is 7 to 8. Alpha begins at 8 and goes to 13 cycles a second. Beta starts at 13 and goes to 25 cycles a second, and gamma starts at 25 and goes up to 100.
Mm-hmm.
And of these waves, typically alpha is the biggest, has the greatest amplitude, which is why it was found first. When Herr Dr. Hans Berger, an Austrian psychiatrist who'd had an ESP-type experience after his horse was shot during one of the battles, Austro-Hungarian Empire against the Ottoman Turks, fell on him, broke his leg, spent a long time in the military hospital. When he got back home to Vienna and he gathered his family together to tell him his story, his sister interrupted him, took him to her bedroom and showed him her Tagebuch, her diary, and she had written down absolutely everything that happened to him. And of course, they didn't have cell phones or, So he believed in ESP, and he went looking for electrical waves in the brain. This was about the time that Volta in France was discovering that if you shocked a frog's leg, it would jump. And so he figured, well, maybe there's electrical waves in the brain. And he went looking for them with very primitive equipment. And the first one he found, actually he would find the biggest one because it would be the easiest one to see, and he called it alpha because it was the first one he found. It's not the fastest, it's not the slowest, but it's the biggest.
Mm-hmm.
And so there you have it. Now, people differ in the amount of alpha they have, and people differ in how creative they are.
Mm-hmm.
They differ in how happy they are, and that also is related to their alpha.
Mm-hmm.
But let's go really, I think one of the most important things is longevity. Because when the alpha goes, life goes. And so, and I'll tell you a story.
Mm-hmm.
One of my teachers was Dr. Charles Levant Yeager, and he was a now vanished breed of scientist called a clinical electroencephalographer. He could look through a 21-channel polygraph. In the olden days, there were big hunks of paper, and the pens would write, the paper would move, and they would write out the brainwaves. It's called a polygraph, meaning many graphs. Mm-hmm. And he could look through a 21-channel polygraph recording and make accurate psychiatric diagnoses. The guy was brilliant. And in 1985, he said, Jim, I need to take you to lunch. I go, sure. What's up? He says, well, I can see where you're going with your research. You're going to be doing a lot around the world with brainwaves. And there's something really important you need to know, something I've learned over the last 30 years. And I don't know how to put this into a scientific journal, but I think I can tell you over lunch. So here's what happened. He was so brilliant that the state of California approached him and requested that he accept a grant from them. Now, if you know anything about getting grants, the government doesn't usually come to you and say, please accept money from us.
No, they don't.
You have to fight your way through, claw your way. Hopefully, you're one of the top few and you get funded. Well, what they wanted him to do was to buy and install brainwave measuring equipment called polygraphs in all the state hospitals. At the peak, before Governor Reagan shut them down, there were about 45 of them. Some of them had dozens of patients, others had hundreds. And so what Dr. Ye, starting in the mid-50s, when he did this, every year with a team of technicians, he would drive to each one of the hospitals all over California, and the technicians would go out into the wards, bring in the patients, put electrodes on the head, run the polygraph, deliver the hunk of polygraph paper to Dr. Yeager, and he would flip through, and read the brainwaves, and then make recommendations for their treatment, maybe change their meds, maybe even release from hospital. Well, he had been doing that for 30 years, and he had recognized some very important things that he wanted to share with me. And he starts out by saying, if there was a patient who was 101 years old and they had good alpha in the record, I knew they would be alive when I came back next year. On the other hand, if it was a young person of 27 and their alpha had diminished or was gone, he would actually hug the person, say a very special goodbye, knowing that it was unlikely they would be alive next year because their alpha had diminished or was gone. And so alpha is life, and the more of it you have, the more life you have, and also the better quality of life. There was also a hospital admission study done at a large Southern California urban hospital, where for 6 months, everybody who was admitted for any reason, they took a routine EEG recording. This could be pregnancy, stabbing, gunshot wound, car accident, elective surgery, didn't matter. If they were admitted, the brainwaves were recorded. Then they followed them up 6 months later. 50% of the people with no alpha in the record were dead 6 months later. Absence of alpha is an indicator of imminently impending mortality. And so you want to live longer? Keep your alpha strong. And once hardening of the arteries sets in, which can happen in your 20s, depending on diet, lifestyle, genetics, that from that point on, it's called atherosclerosis, the frequency of your alpha wave slows about 0.8 of a hertz for every 10 years of life. Alphas, as I said, 8 to 13 cycles. Most people center around 10. So in a little more than 20 years, somebody whose alpha was at 10 is now fallen off the lower edge at 8 cycles. They don't have alpha anymore. They enter senescence or senility, and soon thereafter they die. How do you prevent that? You do brainwave feedback training. Now, if meditation is working for you, that is a good thing to do. But as we noted, I think Krishna said, of 1 million, one hears of me. And then instead of 1 million that hear of me, one reaches me. Those are not good odds.
No.
And so with brainwave feedback, you can up the odds. In fact, when I first started doing this work, it was at Carnegie Mellon University, the first formal academic study I did in 1971. I had 10 high anxiety and 10 low anxiety people. And of the high anxiety, only 12% increased their alpha above their initial eyes closed resting baseline, but they became low anxiety. Okay, so then I moved on a pre-doctoral fellowship to Joe Kamiya's lab in San Francisco, where I had the original turn on. Joe Kamiya, you may remember, is the man who launched this whole field in April of 1962 by presenting at the Western Psychological Association meeting in San Francisco a breakthrough paper that if people are given feedback on their alpha waves, they can learn to make more. And that was, if Joe had published, he probably would have won a Nobel Prize for that. So anyway, I went out there and I did another study with more training, and also we practiced suppression as well as enhancement. Now we had 50% of the high anxiety people learning to increase their alpha, and they all became low anxiety. So then I've made further modifications, more training, longer training. Trainings have always been 7 consecutive days by guidance from the very beginning. And now we're at the point where 100% of high anxiety people who come in learn to increase their alpha above their initial eyes closed resting baseline. And of course, when the alpha goes up, the anxiety goes down. And I published in major scientific journals documenting the fact that alpha goes up, anxiety goes down. And we're talking about both kinds of anxiety, state anxiety and trait. State is like transient of the moment, But trait is a long-term characterological disposition that doesn't usually change unless you change your brainwaves.
You know, one of the things that strikes me, especially, you know, when I see the amount of illness, whether it's mental illness, physical illness, that I see how massive it feels like it's become, and that disconnection between mind and body.
Oh,
I'm struck by it, right? Because I do remember a time in my life where I didn't feel well, and I know that my alpha frequency was not where it could have been. And of course, there's always room for improvements. Is that, you know, I may feel a certain way today, but I still think, you know, it can get better. And I noticed that once I started to connect my mind with my body, a lot of things just really started to work out. I struggle with meditation though. And I know that.
Most people do.
So my feedback is that, right? Like that I know that I could be better. We can always be better at everything.
Well, let's see. A simple way to begin is to say alpha isn't what you think.
Okay.
And if you're thinking, you're not in your best alpha. And you probably, since you have an interest in meditation, you've probably come across the idea that in order to meditate, you have to stop thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you tell somebody, stop thinking, what they do is they think about stopping thinking. And the thinking becomes actually more intense.
Yeah.
It's like, don't think about a pink elephant. Well, you haven't thought about a pink elephant in weeks. But as soon as I say that, herds of them come stampeding through your mind.
Right.
And so how do you stop thinking? Well, you can't, in most cases, you can't do it through a thinking route.
Okay.
And so what happens when you're in the chamber and you're sitting there in the dark, your eyes are closed, you're resting, your breathing is normal. If there's an alpha burst, you hear a tone. It gets louder. So if you're there, and what you'll notice is that as soon as you hear the tone, you start thinking, oh, what was that? How did I do that? How can I do it again? How can I keep it going? All of that has to go away. And so you relax, and then maybe a little bit later, the tone comes again. And you immediately jump on it. Like, how do I do that? How can I keep it going? Well, what you learn to do is to like put a leash on that rational, questioning, verbal analyzer gal person. And so the tone happens, and maybe for a half a second, you can restrain it before it begins what happened? How did I do that? And in that half a second, you have more empty mind and you have more alpha, and you're starting now to experience the benefits of higher amplitude alpha, which is more powerful. Right. Frequency might not change, but the power is getting bigger. And so you cannot describe in words how you get to the point of stopping the word generator. It's an experiential thing. Like, try to tell somebody in words how to ride a bicycle or how to roller skate. Words are not going to convey the how-to. You have to try it, and then your body can learn, because you can learn nonverbal things. This is a nonverbal thing. And so when the tone comes on, you will find that it comes on in moments where thinking has temporarily stopped or become less. For example, like if you have a big burst of alpha and you think, wow, I'm doing pretty good, immediately brings it down. If there's a burst of alpha and the thought is different, it's, wow, she's doing pretty good. It still brings it down, but not as much. Not as much, because the I, which is based on the ego, is more damaging to meditative consciousness than using third person like she or he. In fact, there's an interesting study that was done on measuring wisdom. You know what journaling is, right?
Of course, I do it all the time.
Okay. So here was a study. A group of smart academic psychologists got together, and they created a lengthy, as in like 2 or 3 hours, interview to measure wisdom.
Okay.
And they gave it to a whole bunch of people. Then, I think it was a paid study, and then they divided the people randomly into 2 groups, and both were asked to journal every day. Okay. And they were paid, and their journals were checked to make sure they did it. in the first group, journaled it in the normal way. Like, I got up in the morning, I had this to eat, I sent this text message, I went shopping, I.
Mm-hmm.
The other group were told to journal in third person. Like, she got up, she had this for breakfast, or he got up, he had this for breakfast. That was the only difference. They were both supposed to journal. Half of the people did it in the normal way. I did this, I thought this happened to me. The other one did it in the third person. Well, 6 months later, they bring the people back and they check their journals to make sure they did it every day.
Okay.
And then they re-interviewed them using the wisdom questionnaire. The ones who journaled in the normal way, there was no change in their wisdom. The ones who journaled in third person, big increase in wisdom. Why? Because they went away from the I thought. They took temporary vacations from the ego. Well, in the Biocybernaut Alpha training chambers, you get to take extended vacations from the ego. Now, we had the blessing of getting together for a little chat before we came on. And I was telling you about we were talking about the ego. And like you said, we can sometimes be our own worst enemy. And I expanded on that, or said, well, it's the ego. Right. Can be your worst enemy. Your higher self is not going to be your worst enemy. Mm-hmm. And I described ego as a narcissistic subpersonality. Mm-hmm. And I also described it as the internal ambassador of the devil. Mm-hmm. Or for non-theological people, I say it's the internal ambassador of the external great darkness, the forces of destruction, decay, chaos. Mm-hmm. And so, all right, now what do we know about the ego? Well, in 2006, somebody gave me a tiny little book called The Zen Ox Herding Stories. It's mostly pictures, but a few lines. And it identified the 5 hindrances to meditative progress. Now, the history of this book is fascinating because it represents the distilled wisdom of 1,000 years of Zen practice in Japan, where at the end of the day, the monks would go to their Zen master and they would report on their challenges, their breakthroughs, and, the Zen masters over the decades, over the centuries, for 1,000 years, collected impressions of what is blocking meditation. And they came up with 5 hindrances. They are doubt, drowsiness, distractibility and worry, aversion, any form of ill will, and boredom. Now, to that list, I've added a 6th one, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But these are, in fact, the tools that ego uses. Like if some monk is sitting there, and he's been sitting there for 12 and a half years, and he's just about to have a breakthrough and go into Satori, slipping the surly bonds of ego, ego will put the thought in his mind, oh, this is boring. Or, are you sure you want to be doing it? That's doubt. Or distractibility. His knee starts to itch out of nowhere. And so the ego uses doubt, drowsiness, distractibility and worry, aversion, any form of ill will, and boredom as ways to control people. Because if it doesn't control people, their consciousness will expand, and then there's less for ego to control. Ego is the ultimate control freak. And so these hindrances were very helpful. And when I learned about them in 2006, I started telling all of my trainees, if you're sitting there and you had good sleep, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you're going, go, wait a minute, I'm not tired. That's ego. Get off of me. Or doubt, or drowsy, distractibility, aversion. Somebody comes to mind and you go off on this rant internally. That's all caused by ego. People say, devil made me do it. I would say, your ego is making you do it. And the purpose? To better control you. And everybody has an ego. If you have a body, you have an ego. Now, it can be subtle and evanescent and rarely in evidence, or big and obtrusive and get on people. And egos collaborate. For example, if you have 5 people in there in a meditation class, and they're starting to, make progress, one person's ego will attack somebody else's ego, and so you get what the British would say controversy. You get a controversy, and then you have aversion, ill will, and then meditation goes out the window. Now, I promised I would say that I would tell you what the 6th hindrance is, and it's forgetfulness. Forgetfulness. Now, when I well, I had a person come into training. It was very interesting. He had, his wife had been in an Alzheimer's care home for 7 years. He loved her very much. Every day he would go spend the whole day with her. She did not know who he was, but he went every day. Mm-hmm. And so on his mood scales, and we give mood scales several times a day where a word, emotional words, one at a time appear on the screen. You push a button to indicate how much you feel that. 0, not all, 1 little, 2, moderate, 3, quite a bit, 4, extremely. Mm-hmm. And the computer scores your moods, 21 different moods. But I also, when I wrote this program, I programmed it so that it would make an evaluation as to the accuracy of each person's answer on each question. And so if for example, the word is angry, and the person says 0, and the computer goes, I don't think so. In fact, the computer would say there's only, there's a 99.7% chance that answer is wrong. And then I would ask the person, or the other trainers ask, what's going on? You denied anger, but the computer thinks there may be something there. So then maybe a tear comes out of the eye, lips tremble a little, and then this story comes out of some abuse, some trauma, and then there's a perpetrator, and that person goes on the forgiveness list. And then we have a 14-step forgiveness method that helps people clear out the traumas. I'm still telling this story about how forgetfulness came, but I want to open a window and go sideways, because in May of 2007, Drunvalo Melchizedek and his wife Claudette, he's a world-famous spiritual teacher, he came and did my training. Mm-hmm. And at that time, he had over 550 teachers around the world delivering his 5-day workshops with titles like Awakening the Illuminated Heart, really incredible workshops. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of this training, he said to me, Jim, 95% of all the people around the world who do the Drunvalo workshops do not get the fullness of my teachings. He said, it's always the same reason. I go, really, Drew? What is that? He said, emotional traumas. And then he added, I've never found anything as powerful as the Biocybernaut Alpha training for getting rid of emotional traumas. And there's a whole science and technology that I've developed called the cartography of consciousness, or the brain energy maps, mm-hmm. which show, if you, like a Mercator projection unfolds the world onto a flat, well, the brainwave energy maps unfold the brain onto a flat surface, and then each location represents a place on the brain and a frequency. Could be delta, theta, alpha, beta, whatever, and it could be front, back, left, right, whatever. And so if the brain activity at that location is correlated with either positively or negatively, say anxiety or happiness or, whatever the virtue or skill is, then it creates an elevation above the surface, or if it's a negative, then a well. Okay. And so we know that the brain activity determines what we're thinking and feeling. So Drunvalo found that the alpha training reduces emotional trauma, which get in the way of any kind of enlightenment. And in fact, there's research studies going back into the 1880s that show that anxiety impairs any kind of learning, memorizing words, learning physical skills. Anxiety is the enemy of learning. And so alpha is like a silver bullet against anxiety. When alpha goes up, anxiety goes down. Okay, so now we're back to this guy with the wife in the care home. Mm-hmm. On his mood scales, there was a lot of anger showing up. Denied, he denied it, but the computer was giving him 4, 5, 6 sigmas on saying that the denial is not accurate. Mm-hmm. And so I'm pressing him, saying, like, for 3 days now, you've been getting sigmas on anger. What are you angry about? And then at one point, he kind of hung his head and he muttered. I go, what was that? He was like, oh, well, he didn't really mean to do that. And I said, no, it's important. Tell me. Mm-hmm. And then he said, angry at Maud. That's his wife's name. I go, really? Why are you angry at Maud? You go there every day. You obviously love her. And he said, for ruining our golden years. This couple had never taken a vacation. They saved their money planning to travel the world. They didn't even take weekends off. And then they've got all this money, and then Maud gets Alzheimer's, and no point in traveling. And so he's angry at Maud. So I go, okay, you need to forgive Maud. I go, oh, yeah, I got to forgive Maud. So at the end of the day, there's 4 other people in the training. It's a 5-person training. And we come to his turn, and he talks about what he did in the chamber. And I say, well, did you forgive Maud? He goes, oh, no, I forgot to forgive Maud. I go, So the next day, we had the technicians make little Post-its and put them on the side, the top, the bottom of his monitor, forgive Maud. And when we started the alpha enhancement part of the day, they called in on the mic, now remember to forgive Maud. So he did. It was a powerful forgiveness. And when he was mostly through it, he felt a pain in the middle of his forehead. And the pain got bigger and bigger. And then he said it opened, there was a slit, and he said light came out. And I said, tell me about the light. He goes, it was brighter than the sun. And I go, oh my God, you had a third eye opening. And I spent the next 15 minutes relating the depth of his forgiveness and the importance of his forgiving the most important person in his life to the reward of having this incredible opening of his third eye. We did that for 15 minutes. And then he had a few other things that he did during the day he wanted to talk about. So we talked about that. And then he comes, now, why did I have that experience? And I go, you're kidding, right? He goes, no, why did I have that experience? And I realized that ego's like choking him, didn't want him to remember. And so I said, you know why. We spent 15 minutes talking about it. Your ego is blocking you from remembering. And so we're not going to go on. This whole group is just going to sit here until you break through the grip that ego has on your consciousness. And it took about 3 or 4 minutes because I forgave Maud. And everybody cheered. And so that was great. Now we know that forgiveness is also used by the ego. Mm-hmm. But then that gave me another problem. Like, in 1,000 years of Zen practice, how could all of those Zen masters have missed forgetfulness? Why didn't it show up? Why wasn't it on, instead of a list of 5 hindrances in the little book Zen Ox Herding Stories, why weren't there 6? And so every time I would introduce the hindrances, which were very helpful for people in doing their work, forgiveness especially, I would say metaphorically, sort of rhetorically, how did those Zen guys miss forgetfulness? Now, some people would humorously say, well, because they forgot. But of course, that isn't the answer. And so all through 2006, all through 2007, in 2008, last training we did there in Santa Clara, California, was in July. Then we shut down. Our lease was ending in the month. I'd previously bought a big 8,000 square, well, it was 5,000. I expanded it to 8,000 square foot home out on Vancouver Island. And it was the training center, the new training center. Mm-hmm. At the time, I foolishly believed in global warming, and so I wanted to be further north. When I actually realized we're now actually going into global cooling, it's a grand solar minimum. It's going to get very cold. There'll be crop failures all planet-wide, the 5 coldest years, according to the Ukrainian-born solar astrophysicist Valentina Zarkova, will be 2028 to 2033, those 5 years. No food will grow outdoors anywhere on the planet north of the 45th parallel, which means none in Canada, none in North Dakota, none in Montana, none in Washington, none in England, Scotland, Wales, Finland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, most of France, all of Germany, and so on. So stock up. Have some freeze-dried foods.
I'm in Miami, so I should be okay.
Well, the orange groves may freeze. You know, all it takes is one killing frost in July, and you can pretty much cancel. But yeah, there will be a rush southward as people abandon the unlivable areas further north. But that's another story. So I moved to Canada, and in December of 2008, I think we started training in September. Mm-hmm. I had a 5-person training. One of them was a brilliant man. His name is Alan Paul Markin. With one partner, Murray Edwards, they co-founded Canadian Natural Resources Limited, CNRL Limited, which in 2 years, they grew from 0 to $2 billion, and it's now Canada's 2nd largest oil and gas company. Brilliant man. And so when I asked this question, like, how did those Zen guys miss forgetfulness? Alan popped up and he gave me a 1-word answer that blew my mind. The one word was mercury.
Mercury.
Yeah. Mercury is a toxic, heavy metal that causes, guess what?
Forgetfulness.
Yeah. It also causes hair loss and shyness and destroys neurons, but it causes forgetfulness. And then, because I'm an amateur climatologist, I realized that before the widespread burning of coal, which in the advanced countries only goes back 200 years, there was no mercury contamination of the biosphere. And so the reason that 1,000 years of Zen practice failed to identify forgetfulness as a hindrance is because people's minds didn't forget back then because they didn't have a burden of mercury like all of us do now. If you've ever eaten any tuna or swordfish, guess what? You have mercury contamination. Mm-hmm. And so this tells us a lot. First of all, to imagine human society without forgetfulness. Like the Aboriginal people, in their first song, they date their history back about 50,000 years, the Australian Aboriginals. And so song, of course, is a great way to remember because you have the rhythm and you have the cadence. Sometimes you have rhyming, you have melody, all of which helps you remember. So if you put your founding story in song, you can remember better. But it also tells us something really important about the ego, which is the ego is an opportunistic predator. During those 1,000 years of Zen practice, ego didn't try to obstruct the meditative practice of the Zen monks using forgetfulness because they didn't have mercury in their brains. Now, everybody has some mercury contamination, and so ego, ever at the ready, looking for a way to sabotage your spiritual growth or even just your happiness, uses forgetfulness.
Interesting. And what can you do about that now?
Oh, well, Alan would ask me to count. He made a $6 million scholarship fund to train people from his company. Mm-hmm. And he said the ROI, the return on investment of a Biocybernaut training, was 100. So he was happy to send people. But also, he paid for over 200 Canadian Aboriginals to come. And so they had as much PTSD as returning war veterans. And in fact, I wanted to show you this. Mm-hmm. It's a paper published in Advances in Mind-Body Medicine.
Okay.
And it's entitled Reductions in Psychopathology in a Cohort of Male and Female Canadian Aboriginals. And then on the results page, we gave them batteries of personality tests, and it shows, reductions in anxiety, paranoia, schizophrenia, depression. All the bad things went down, and all the good things like friendly and vigor and clear thinking went up. And so we were doing this research on the Canadian Aboriginals, and we also want to extend that to U.S. veterans. And one of our big projects right now is to work with veterans. And I have previous history. Well, in fact, last year, in September, I trained a man just out of Special Forces, SOCOM, Special Operations Command, and he had suicide pattern. I've known for at least 10 years there's a brainwave pattern that if you have that, you've either attempted suicide or seriously considered it. Well, he told me that 13 of his closest buddies had already committed suicide, and it was only September. Okay. Now, aside from the personal loss, the family loss, the tragedy, the loss of life, each one of these guys has over $5 million in government training in them. So it's also, it's a loss of skill, it's a loss of ability. And so he's actually put in a FOIA, Freedom of Information request to SOCOM, Special Operations Command, because what's totally cool is that he'd known about my work for some time, because in 1985, I was privileged to move my technology to a secret Army base where they were training U.S. Army Green Berets. And I provided the training to two 12-man teams. And he tracked their careers. He said of the 5 that were low-level officers. 4 of them made it to the rank of general. And he said their career paths, there has been, he said, no group of 24 military men whose career paths as a group was as positive as this group. So just for example, like they know that for the special forces people, one of the most important characteristics for the success in learning and then executing their missions is fluid IQ. Now, IQ is composed of 2 parts, crystallized and fluid. Mm-hmm. And I have done a research study where I gave the Kaufman adolescent and adult intelligence test to everybody who trained during one summer. They ranged in age from 10 to 64. Okay. And I administered this very detailed test. It takes 4 hours to administer. You can only do one person at a time. So it's labor intensive. But it breaks down the crystallized and the fluid IQ dimensions. Both have subscales. And there were significant increases in both the crystallized IQ and the fluid IQ. And that's apparently quite rare. And what's most important for these SOCOM people is they need high fluid IQ. Well, we can train that. Remember the brainwaves rule? Any experience that you have, which includes being smart, being clever, being creative, it requires a pattern of brainwaves, and particularly alpha. At one point, I trained a group of Stanford Research Institute scientists. Creativity is their, bread and butter. And we measured their creativity before and after the training. Average increase, 50%. We're not talking about, onesies, twosies, even a dozen percent. Right. No, 50% increase. And some of them in the chamber solved problems that they'd been beating their heads against in their laboratory for the last 2 years. So, yeah, brainwaves rule.
I know you say that. It's really cute how you say that, honestly. But, one of the things I'd like to hear your elevator pitch, not to minimize it, but your elevator pitch for Biocybernaut. What would you say?
What would that be? Like a minute?
Take your time.
Oh, okay.
Take your time.
Well, okay. So I'm in an elevator and we're going from, the 3rd sub-basement up to the 27th floor.
Okay.
Okay. And so somebody says, hi, how are you? What do you do? And I go, well, I help people to control their own brainwaves. Well, why do you do that? Well, because it gets rid of things that they don't want and increases things that they want. Well, like what? Well, if, for example, it gets rid of anxiety, depression, paranoia, even can eliminate schizophrenia. And things that people want, well, they want higher IQ. The boost is almost 12 points. It's stable at least a year out. They want more emotional intelligence. In fact, the Emotional Intelligence 2.0 by Dr. Travis Bradbury and Jean Greaves points out that EQ is the master skill of success. It accounts for 58% of your success in life. And the boost by this training, Alpha 1, is almost 16 points. Now, he's also researched that looking globally, a 1 point increase in EQ nets a person almost $1,500 more annual income. And that's counting incomes in India and Bangladesh and the Maldives, East Africa, as well as Germany and France and the U.S. and Canada. And so the boost in EQ that we routinely produce,
right,
more than pays for the cost of the training. And obviously, if you live in a first world country, your opportunities for increase are much better. And so we have emotional intelligence increasing. So I know this has gone a little further than the elevator pitch, but you get rid of bad things and you enhance good things. And then, oh, by the way, let's say that you are really looking for enlightenment. Well, we know the brainwaves of enlightenment. I can tell you the brainwaves of people who see angels. And if you and they're trainable. I actually had a former San Francisco 49er in training one time, and he didn't have the angel pattern on day 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. And on day 5, all of a sudden, angel pattern showed up. And my technician came running, and I said, oh, yeah, that's right. It's going to be very... Well, I can't say when he came out of the chamber that he was white as a sheet because he was a big black guy, but he was shaken because 3 angels had showed up in the chamber and had gone, you haven't been living a very good life, which was true. And he went, ah! And so he had tremendous reform in his life. He even stopped drinking coffee out of that encounter. And training a pattern to see angels, it's trainable. You can, it's a distinct pattern of brainwaves. And if you have a lot of the pattern, I mean, if the amplitudes are big, I asked one woman who had, high amplitudes and the pattern, I said, do you see angels? She goes, there's hundreds of them around me all the time. And, I may have mentioned working with the Green Berets. When I first got to the Army base, I taught them how to put on electrodes on each other because there are a lot of heads. And then I ran each one through our 3 baselines, eyes open, eyes closed, white noise. And then I had a private interview with each one. Well, with one of the 24, he had angel pattern. Now, imagine this. I'm a private little office, big skinhead killer dude sitting across the desk from me, looking at his brainwave numbers. I'm looking at him like, how do I ask a guy like this? And so finally I go, do you talk to beings that other people don't see? Well, it was like I hit him with a 2x4. He tipped over in his chair, almost fell over backwards. He's having a panic attack. He's hyperventilating. He goes, how do you know? And I go, well, I see it in your numbers. He says, I've only told my best buddy on pain of death. If he should ever tell anybody, how do you know? And I go, well, you have a brainwave pattern, which I've known for years, is only in people that can see angels or astral plane beings. So then he fessed up. He said, well, kind of in a whisper, when I'm doing my martial arts training, this little old Asian martial arts master shows up, and he coaches me, and nobody else can see him. Angel pattern. And we also know the brainwave pattern for Kundalini, this incredible energy that comes up the spine, transforming lives.
So
brainwaves rule.
Yeah. So we can potentially, by rewiring our brainwaves, how much of this can we do on our own? Like truly, assuming the ego does not interfere. How?
Well, very good question.
Yeah.
And a simple way to answer it is there was a beautiful study done in Japan by 2 pillars of the Japanese scientific community, Dr. Kasamatsu and Dr. Hirai. They wanted to study the brainwaves of Zen meditation. So in Zen, there are 2 main branches, like Christianity has Protestant and Catholic, and variations in both. There's Old Catholics and, Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox Catholics. So in Zen, the 2 branches are Soto and Rinzai.
Okay.
And so they went to Zen masters in both Soto and Rinzai and very respectfully requested permission to measure brainwaves on the monks. Permission granted. Then they went a little further and they asked the Zen masters to rate their monks for level of spiritual development. And they did, beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So then now they're measuring the brainwaves. Well, the first thing they know just right out of the chute was the higher the rated level of spiritual development, the more alpha in the record. That was just simple. But then there were, remember, the beginners were typically 0 to 6 years. You're wondering, how can you do this on your own? 0 to 6 years, they were classified as beginners. And when they meditated, they had a little bit of alpha occur at the back of the head only. Those rated intermediate were typically 6 to 21 years of daily practice. And when they meditated, started out the back of the head, but then the alpha would spread forward on the head. That was the difference between 6 years and up to 21 years. Mm-hmm. Now, the advanced, and nobody was rated advanced who had less than 21 years, and some had up to 40, started at the back of the head, spread forward on the head, and then in the masters, the advanced, it did 2 things that it didn't do in the beginners or the intermediate. The frequency slowed a little. Like if their alpha was at 11 hertz, it might slow to 10. Or if it was at 10, it might slow to 9.2. So a little slowing of the frequency. And then, astonishingly, theta waves began to be emitted from the two frontal locations, F3 and F4. And so we know what the difference is between beginning Zen, usually 0 to 6 years, intermediate, 6 to 21, and advanced, 21, and in this study, up to 40.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's how long it takes in Zen. Now, in 1997, I published a paper where I took 17 right-handed people who had graduated from the Alpha 1 training, cleaned up the artifacts in their records, and what I showed was the alpha increased at the back of the head, spread forward on the head, slowed a little in frequency, and theta waves were emitted from the frontal locations. Exact same pattern as was seen in only the advanced end, and it didn't take 21, 40 years, it only took 7 days. Our technology speeds up the process of awakening, process of enlightenment. You can do it on your own if you have the fortitude and the discipline. For somebody to sit there for 10 years with nothing happening, it takes a certain kind of person. And in fact, in this study, another thing I didn't mention was, I know the brainwave pattern for halos. And the way I discovered that was I had the privilege of having the brainwave records on FM tape of Suzuki Roshi and 30 of his monks, which were rated beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Mm-hmm. And then my first job after getting my PhD was to read the assembly language code of a program that Alan Gevins had written for the EEG Systems Lab at Langley Porter Neuropsychiatric Institute, which was part of UCSF. And it did power and coherent spectral analysis. So it broke down the power of the brainwaves into a spectrum. It also broke down the coherence into a spectrum. Like if you have two different sites, they can be coherent in alpha, but maybe not in theta. Or maybe they're coherent in delta, but not in, theta. Right. And so there's a spectrum of coherence. Well, in Suzuki Roshi's record, there was a bimodal coherence. He had simultaneous coherence in alpha and theta. That was seen in only one other of the monks that he brought, a guy named Dick Baker. I can say the name because he and Suzuki Roshi are no longer in their bodies. Mm-hmm. And he had a little bit of this pattern. And so I know as a scientist that to have statistical significance, all you need is 1 out of 20. That's 5%. Okay. You can say it's significant. Well, this was 1 out of 30, so I knew it was significant. So I made a report. I showed pictures of the power and coherent spectral analysis and said, look, this advance has a little bit of this pattern, wasn't seen in any of the other monks. And then, but I didn't know what it meant. I went back to doing my work, developing the technology of running trainings. Well, 7 years later, Suzuki Roshi died. It was a conscious passing. He sent out notices like, next Thursday, I'm leaving my body, come on by. And there were 45 people in the room, including Dick Baker. And when he died, people in the room felt something leave the body of the dying Roshi, travel across the room, and invest itself into, guess what, Dick Baker. It's called giving transmission. And so we created a bit of a scandal in the Zen community for a variety of reasons. But for me, I knew immediately why, because Suzuki Roshi had spent a lifetime, or maybe multiple lifetimes, creating this consciousness. And as he looked out around the room, there was only one vessel capable of receiving what he was about to drop. He couldn't take it with him. Right. So he invested, he gave transmission. So now I'm more excited. I make another scientific presentation, but I still don't know what it means. And I think it was 11 years later where I was at a conference on chaos theory as applied to analysis of brainwaves somewhere on the East Coast. It was like 2,500 people there, big audience. Most of the people were spooks, like CIA, NSA, military intelligence, FBI. And a lot of the papers were very mathematical, talking about dells and curls. And I knew all this stuff. I'd been a math whiz in high school and college, but it wasn't that interesting. But then
I'm a mathematical person. I get it.
Yeah. I mean, I know it, but yeah. I mean, I can I love linear algebra. It was the basis of my learning how to do data analysis on large arrays. Differential equations, yum, okay. Okay, so then he introduced a guy, he's Dr. Arnold Mendel. Now, I knew something was up because this guy was introduced as the former chairman of the psychiatry department at UC Davis. Psychiatry is a very prestigious profession. Psychiatrists get to define what normal is. And so, but Dr. Mendel loved mathematics so much that he gave up that title, all that power, that prestige, to be a low-ranking math professor in some other college. And so I figure this is going to be interesting. So he starts talking about how brainwaves follow Fibonacci scaling. As a math whiz, you know that Fibonacci numbers are fundamental in the universe.
Yes.
The first, 0, 1, 1, 1 and 2, and 2, and 1, 3, and 3, and 2, and 5. The ratios of all adjacent Fibonacci numbers, except for the first few, are irrational. They never resolve to a whole number. And so that property, and plants know Fibonacci numbers. When a little plant comes out of the ground, puts out a leaf, it's smart enough not to put out the second leaf directly above it because it would shade the sunlight. So the second leaf is offset some angular degree. And Fibonacci numbers tell you how many leaves you have to go up the stem before you find one leaf directly above another one.
Yeah.
So Fibonacci numbers are deeply embedded in nature. And when Dr. Mendel said, brainwaves follow Fibonacci scaling, I'm immediately doing calculations in my head, but I'm arguing with him because if you take the center frequency of delta and add it to the center frequency of theta, you do not get the center frequency of alpha. But then he dispels my argument by saying, well, now you have to understand that delta is not a monolith. There's low delta and there's high delta. They have different generators in the brain. And, okay, so if you have the center frequency of low delta, center frequency of high delta, you do get the center frequency of theta. And then what I had seen was the Zen Master and Dick Baker, because they had coherence at roughly 5 cycles and coherence at roughly 10 cycles. And so what I had seen was a halo. I had seen that, and so when at the end, when Dr. Mendel's talk was over, the lunch bell rang, and all 2,500 people, except for me and he, emptied out. And as I walked down, first foot on the stage, he said, "You must be a physicist and a psychologist." I go, "Well, yeah, how do you know that?" And he said, "Only somebody with physics and psychology could possibly have this kind of data." And then we talked for like 3 hours. And so I know what the brainwave patterns are of halos. And in fact, I started gathering pictures of, because all the way back into the Middle Ages, religious paintings of saints would picture them with halos. Intriguingly, a lot of these paintings from the 500s and 600s would also show a disc-shaped UFO floating in the background, somewhere in the sky above these. And sometimes the halo would be like this, sometimes it would be like this, and on rare occasions it would be like this. And so it's rare for there to be like a 10-to-1 power asymmetry left to right brain, but if somebody had a 10-to-1 asymmetry in power, where the right hemisphere had more power than the left, and they had the halo pattern, it would pull the halo over to one side. In fact, the typical position for the yarmulke is right here. And a yarmulke is a dimensionally compressed halo, in my view. And that is the alpha dome. And so that would be the position typically where the halo would be right there. And so wearing a yarmulke could be, although most people don't know this or forgot it, it could be a reminder of the state of consciousness, which is characterized by the occurrence of a torus floating over the head. Fun stuff.
Wow. Wow. That is so much unpacked between halos, a yarmulke, the Zen Master passing away, Dick Baker. Like, wow. This was not at all what I expected on today's episode, but it is fantastic information. I just, I want to be there. I want to be at that, sort of, because for me as a mathematical person, as a so there's that aspect, the analytical, but then as a musician, the creative, who doesn't want to be
Right.
all the way with all of that just opened up? And, tell us how we could do this trading. Is it available for day-to-day people, Dr. Hardt?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
www.biocybernaut.com. I'll get you to the website.
Right.
If people want to connect with me directly, I'm Jim at biocybernaut.com.
Word's getting out.
Yeah. And I say this training's not for everyone.
Right.
It's only for people with brains.
Sure. And so you start with the IQ test?
Well, we had somebody who had an IQ of 75 and ended up at 120 after the week.
120? That's superior, correct?
Yeah, it is. And the thing is, you have to have a brain. It doesn't have to be a smart brain. You just have to have a brain.
Correct. Because you will open that up.
Yeah, the training will take care of the smarts.
That's great. That's great. Anything else we haven't covered?
Oh, I'm sure there is, but how about we plan to get together again?
Oh, I would love that. I feel I'm trying to be respectful of your time, but I feel like I could talk to you for like 24 hours straight, because this is just such a, it's so eye-opening just for me to have started looking into it in the last 2 years. It makes me feel like, what if I'd known about this 20 years ago or 30 years ago?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And it's just one of those things. I feel the same way about mindsets. I wish I had more of a growth mindset when I was younger. But hey, we are exactly where we're.
Here we are.
Exactly.
Yes.
Thank
you ever so much. I really appreciate
so much. Thank
who
you.
You are and what you do and how you do it.
I'm hoping to. I just feel that I've had, good people on my side. It's kind of like what I was saying about my grandmother doing things in threes. It's a podcast. Who knows what comes from it, right? It's literally a passion project, because I've had people on my side, I've had supporters, and if I could give that to somebody else by bringing on, subject matter experts, even storytellers, then, I believe you receive information when you're open to receive it. The timing has to be right for you, but that's the power of platforms like YouTube, right? It'll cross your path when you're ready to hear it and see it. Yeah. So kind of like your consciousness talk that you went to. That's a great story. I'm going to tell that story aloud.
Okay. Thank you.